So, as we know, FDR has his New Deal, but the New Deal is not without critics. There are some people who, like this lady down here, says, FDR, you're nuts. And so we know FDR has the backing more or less out of Congress. Congress has been approving almost everything he's wanted so far. And so here you go. He is stepping in time with the executive branch. But the judicial branch isn't having it. Remember the AAA, the agriculture thing, or the NRA, the Blue Eagle thing? Both of those had been considered or declared unconstitutional. And so FDR is looking for a way to get some more influence in the Supreme Court. So this is his court packing plan. So for every justice in the Supreme Court over the age of 70, FDR wanted to be able to add a new judge. FDR was saying, these 9 old Supreme Court justices just couldn't keep up with current demand. And so we need to add people to help them keep up. And so here you go. He just ain't fast enough. On the bench, we have the old 9 and President Roosevelt's request for 6 new Supreme Court justices. So at the time, there were 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices over the age of 70. So Congress is used to saying, yes, President Roosevelt, whatever you say, President Roosevelt. But in this case, Congress was outraged. This stepped over the line, right? And so Congress absolutely refused to approve of this court packing plan because it was obvious that Roosevelt would just put onto the court people who would support his New Deal legislation. And so here you go. This is FDR. And you can see this donkey, this Democratic donkey, is having a hissy fit down here, right? And FDR says, all I said was, give me 6 more judges. Why is Congress raising a racket here? And here's another one, the ventriloquist. Yes, we all vote yes. Because obviously whoever he would have appointed to the Supreme Court would have supported his New Deal plans. All right, so that was the court packing plan, and it didn't work, right? This is the one time Congress is like, no, you overstepped the line. All right, so next we're going to look at a handful of what are considered demagogues. Before we talk about the different demagogues in history, we're going to talk about what the word itself means. So the word demagogue just means political leader who seeks support by appealing to popular desires and prejudices. So I think of it as this. So say you have a 7th grader, and this 7th grader is running for student body president. And so he's going to give a speech in front of the whole class talking about why he should be the president. And in this speech, the 7th grader gets up and says, vote for me. If you vote for me, I will make sure that every Tuesday is Taco Tuesday. Every Tuesday, Crispitos for all, right? If you vote for me, I will make sure you never have to do homework ever again in your life. Vote for me and I will, put Hawaiian Punch or Gatorade into the water fountains. And he'll then kind of go on and appeal to popular prejudices. So say, where I grew up, we were the Spirit Lake Indians, and our arch nemesis was the Okoboji Pioneers. And so maybe the kid comes up and says, those Okoboji Pioneers, they're so stupid. And everyone in Spirit Lake would clap, yeah, they're so stupid. Yeah, those Okoboji Pioneers, they're never going to win a football game ever again, right? Oh yeah, we hate the Pioneers. And so that's kind of a demagogue. There is no actual support behind these promises. It's just a way to gain support by appealing to people's desires for Gatorade in the water fountain or people's prejudices against, the arch nemesis football team or what have you. And so we're going to see these demagogues, if you will, they all had criticisms of FDR. Some thought FDR went too far. Some thought FDR didn't go far enough. And so these are all demagogues, and they are all critics of the New Deal in one form or the other. Up first, we have Huey Long. Huey Long is a fun kid. Like, he just has a cool, big personality. And so what he came up with was this. It was called Share Our Wealth Program, right? So Share Our Wealth Society, every man a king. And the big idea is he's going to tax the wealthy and give that excess money to the common man. So you don't necessarily have to write everything down that I'm going to say, but tax the wealthy. It looked like this. So each family couldn't have a personal fortune over 50 million. So if you had like $300 million, all of that would be taken away except for the 50 million. A person couldn't make more than $1 million a year. If they made more than $1 million a year, the rest of that income would go to the government. And you couldn't inherit more than $5 million. So say you have your dad dies and he had a $100 million fortune, you couldn't inherit more than $5 million. And so that's the idea, is tax like the uber wealthy. And then what would happen is we'd use that money and he would guarantee every family an annual income of $2,000. He would say this would be enough to buy a home, a car, and a radio. He thought every family was owed those three things. And then he said, be free college or vocational training for everyone. You would only have a 30-hour work week and you'd be guaranteed 4 weeks of vacation every year. So this was his plan, right? Who was he in general? He was first the governor of Louisiana, and then after he was governor, he became a senator of Louisiana. And his ideas were really popular, obviously, because these are things everyone wanted. But he was assassinated in 1935 when he was still when he was senator of Louisiana. He was actually assassinated in Louisiana state capitol by a political rival's son-in-law. And so he was shot, and then I think he died like the next day. And so Huey Long, his ideas were popular, but they didn't really go anywhere after he was assassinated. So we're going to listen to a little clip of one of his speeches. This is the Share Our Wealth speech. All right.
According to the tables which we have assembled, it is our estimate that 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth of America, and that over 70% of the people of America don't own enough to pay the debts that they owe. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with. Now, how are you going to feed the balance of the people? What's Morgan and Baruch and Rockefeller and Mellon going to do with all that grub? They can't eat it. They can't wear the clothes. They can't live in the house. Give them a yacht. Give them a palace. Send them to Reno and give them a new wife when they want it. If that's what they want. But when they've got everything on the God's living earth that they can eat and they can wear and they can live in, and all that their children can live in and wear and eat and all their children's children can use, then we got to call Mr. Morgan and Mr. Mellon and Mr. Rockefeller back and say, come back here. Put that stuff back on this table here that you took away from here, that you don't need. Leave something else for the American people to consume.
All right, so next up we have Father Charles Coughlin. So Father Coughlin was a Catholic priest from the Diocese of Detroit, and he at first was a supporter of the New Deal. But after a while, he thought that the New Deal simply wasn't going far enough. And so over time, he started to give these kind of anti-New Deal radio broadcasts. And he was really famous. At its height, they figured about 30 million people tuned in weekly. At his height, he had about 80,000 letters coming in the mail every week. And so his big message was relief was just not quick enough. It wasn't radical enough. He wanted major monetary reform. He wanted the government to nationalize, which means to like take over, kind of like we nationalized, if you will, like the post office. You know, the government's in charge of the post office. He wanted to like nationalize the major industries and railroads. And he was very popular, as we said, but he was anti-Semitic, right? Anti-Jewish. He believed that there were Jewish bankers had been responsible for the Russian Revolution. He was actually friends with JFK's dad, Joseph Kennedy. FDR actually had Joseph Kennedy try to convince Coughlin to start supporting the New Deal again, which is neither here nor there. But after a while, the bishop in his diocese decided that he should not have a radio program anymore. And so the bishop of his diocese more or less says, you need to cease all political activities immediately, or I'm going to kind of take away your abilities to act as a priest. And so he said, okay, that's fine. And so kind of the bishop of his diocese pulled the plug on his radio broadcasts. So this is just a picture. This is just kind of a fun fact. So after his career of radio was done, he was actually became the pastor of the National Shrine of the Little Flower, which is kind of outside of Detroit. So the Little Flower, if you know her, she's Saint Therese. I'm a fan of Saint Therese, okay? A lovely Carmelite saint there. And so this is actually a picture of the inside of the National Shrine to Saint Therese. And you can see this is his Silver Jubilee. So when he was celebrating 25 years of the priesthood. So once again, we're going to listen to some of his radio broadcasts, what it would sound like.
The depression still waxed strong as the powers of deflation reached out to confiscate homes, to capture farms, and to keep that ever-marching army of jobless upon our streets, wondering when God in his mercy would lift his hand. I dared you and challenged you to organize so that the people, if not the president, would drive the money changers from the temple, and you did it. They believe that the Federal Reserve Bank has the right to coin and regulate the value of money. They're not even Americans, these so-called Democrats and Republicans. You appreciate the fact, my dear friends, that among other things in the National Union for Social Justice, we are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it.
So you can see some definitely anti-Semitic remarks. You could also see the crowd cheering about it as well, because he is kind of a demagogue, right? There's definitely, even in the United States, prejudice against Jewish people, and he's kind of harping to that as well. All right, so we're moving on. So Dr. Francis Townsend is a retired doctor, medical doctor from California, and this is his idea. He says we should send every person over the age of 60 a $200 check every month. All right? And then we'll fund that by having a national sales tax of 2%. But the catch is that that person, the retired person, has to spend that check within 30 days. They can't hoard the check. And he said, one, you're helping out the elderly. And two, you're going to kickstart the economy because they're going to spend the money, and that's going to help the wheels turn. With Dr. Francis Townsend, though, this is actually really the root, if you will, for the Social Security Act, or at least the old age pension of the Social Security Act. So this is something that actually, comes to fruition to some extent. Not the $200 per month exactly, but the typical idea of it all. Okay. Last but not least, we have a group that says FDR is out of his mind. FDR has gone too far. And this group is the American Liberty League. Here's the lovely little American Liberty League symbol down there. But the idea is this is nonpartisan. So both Republicans and conservative Democrats, people who think FDR is a little out of hand, they get together to make this. They think, like I said, the New Deal was too far and FDR was too powerful. So you can see over in the cartoon, that's FDR. First, he's reorganizing the government, and then he was hoping to revise the Supreme Court, and then the next step would be, the dictatorship. And so they thought FDR was too powerful. Also, they warned of creeping socialism. Remember, America, we're all about private sector. We're all about capitalism. Socialism is when the government takes more and more control of specific industries, whatever. And so they said, this is creeping socialism, and we can't afford it. We are going to go bankrupt. And in general, American Liberty League was all about, we want a smaller government. Think of, Jeffersonian democracy, right? Thomas Jefferson wanted every man to own his own farm and that the government really shouldn't affect his day-to-day life. And so they wanted to hearken back to that idea of this Jeffersonian democracy. All right. And so this is a lot on this page, but I'm just going to kind of briefly summarize kind of the pros and the cons that are kind of brought out with the New Deal. So with the cons on the left, bureaucracy mushroomed, meaning like the structures within government are really growing. As the federal government gains more power, the states lose theirs. Our national debt doubles between 1932 and 1939. People worry that we're becoming a handout state and that we're going to undermine virtues of hard work and an initiative. Also, as we mentioned, they're worrying about creeping socialism, that the government's going to kind of take over and it's going to undermine the private sector. And they argue the New Deal didn't actually cure the Depression. Really, when you look at it, it's going to be World War II that's going to actually relieve the effects of the Depression. But those on the flip side, those who said, this wasn't the worst thing ever, they said it may have saved capitalism, right? Because we did something, there wasn't a major revolution like there had been in Russia. So maybe this saved us from revolution. Also, it did relieve the worst parts of the crisis in 1933 at its height. It promoted the idea that the federal government was morally bound to manage the economy in order to prevent mass hunger. So the government was in charge, in some sense, of the people. Some reforms are still around, right? FDIC is still there. Minimum wage, maximum hours, Social Security, all of those reforms are still in place. They said a lot of those back to work programs help citizens retain self-respect. And, it's a kind of a middle of the road approach in some people's mind between, kind of like Hoover, who did nothing, and communism when the government's kind of completely overtaken. And so for better or for worse, there was a lot of critics, but mostly the New Deal was able to go forward.